In front of me, in this big silver case, we have a telescope. And this is a telescope that I did not buy. It is on loan to me, and it comes directly from the maker of the telescope, which is a Taiwanese company called Founder Optics. This telescope is a 106 millimeters aperture refracting telescope with a focal length of 636 millimeters, which means that natively it is a focal ratio of f6, which is actually quite nice for such a refractor. Before I open the box, let me talk a bit about what Founder Optics is, at least what I gathered from them. They're a Taiwanese company. The telescope itself is made in Taiwan, but the design of the optics is apparently in Japan. So it's a bit like Apple, designed in California, made in China. Here it's like designed in Japan, made in Taiwan kind of deal. And the design is actually made apparently by a famous Japanese designer who asks to remain anonymous. So your guess is as good as mine. And it tries to mimic the Takahashi design for their FSQ-106, the legendary 106 Takahashi telescope. It has apparently three lenses at the front, which are separate from one another, and they are air-spaced. They are, I think, FPL 53, 51, and lengthenum. But honestly, I really don't care about any of that. I'm just here to check how the scope works, how well it is built, how well the mechanics of the scope work, and of course how well it will perform under the stars for an average Joe kind of guy like me. I will be testing this telescope under the stars with the camera that I have behind me, which is an APS-C size sensor with the IMX571 sensor from Sony. I'm currently trying to source a good full frame sensor with small pixels so I could do more rigorous testing of such telescopes, but no luck for now. So unfortunately, I'll have to stop at APS-C size, and we'll see how well the aberrations, if any, are controlled on the telescope. So without further ado, let's open the scope, the box, and see what's inside. Yummy. So the first thing that I see is that we have an inspection report and manual. To be completely honest, I've already opened the manual, checked it out, and looked at the inspection report. It has this particular scope's inspection report with a raunchy test and a star test. Now, I know very little about raunchy tests, so you'll probably be able to comment on this more than I, but the star test does look really good, and it is always awesome to have like an independent kind of test per telescope. I've also checked the manual, and like I'm used to getting like refractors with nothing, no manual, no nothing, and this is actually a pretty good manual that explains everything. It's really good for beginners, and I like that. It's good. Please provide manuals with the scope. Like, not everyone is an advanced as photographers, even when buying a scope like this. With this, we do have a handle that can be affixed on top of the scope. It can be used to carry the scope around and or to affix things onto the handle itself, as it also doubles as a rail. We also have a dedicated field flattener. And we have here an additional adapter for the field flattener. This is just to change the size of the threads on the field flattener. By default, the M42 threads were mounted. I changed them to M48. We also have a dovetail plate that's available under the telescope that will be able to affix to the telescope, and a microfiber cloth that I will never, ever use. Now we can look at the telescope in more details. It really is a beauty, and I really like actually telescopes that are refractors and that have a diameter of roughly 106 or 107 millimeters. There's tons of other choices on the market, from the very expensive ones like the Takahashi 106. We have the Borg Fluorite 107, if I remember correctly. We have, of course, the ASCAR 107 PHQ, which is an f7 telescope compared to this one that's f6. And we also have something like the Skywatcher Esprit 100. So there's tons of choices in this range, and I find those telescopes to be like just the right size for people who want to go from a small refractor like the Red Cat, but they want more reach and they don't want to bother with all of the settings and adjustments that are required by something like a Newtonian telescope. If you've watched the channel recently, you've seen I've struggled to make my budget Newt work well. So please be aware of that. that. So that's why someone would buy such a refractor rather than a Newtonian. They get this 5 to maybe 700 millimeters kind of focal length, so they have some reach. They still have a decent focal ratio. The field is well corrected. The refractor is not that heavy, so you can use it on a variety of entry-level mounts. And it is not that huge either. If you look at something like the Skywatcher Esprit 120, that thing is humongous and so much more difficult to drive. So I really like the size 107. Before I go further, let me actually space out a little bit the rings and attach the dovetail bar as well as the handlebar so that you can see how it looks like once it's kind of like fully ready to image. And we're done, and here's how it looks like. Now it's very interesting because the box, the cutouts from the scope, don't seem to expect that you'll have the telescope mounted with the handle and the dovetail bar with the rings spaced out. The cutouts, like right now, if I try to put back the scope in the case, it doesn't work. I would have to enlarge the cutouts. So it's a small thing, but it's, I don't know, slightly disappointing, but like really, really minor detail. Okay, now that it's fully ready, which was very easy to do, the rings are very smooth, very easy to handle, which is expected for the price. So yes, let me talk a bit about the price of this telescope. Of course, I have all the links in the description if you are interested. The price is $2,400 right now, $2,399. And we'll see in this video if it's worth the price, at least from your point of view. At that price, it does make the telescope in the range of more something like the ASCAR side. It is like maybe 2 to 3 times less expensive, maybe even more, than the Borg or Takahashi version, especially the Takahashi version, which apparently it's trying to emulate. So the price looks right on paper, at least for this size of scope. Do the mechanics justify the price to start with? So at first glance, it does seem so. So the first thing that I noticed is that there are 3 separate screws to actually hold the lens hood in place. So I can loosen the screws and then slowly pull out the lens hood. Why is this so erotic? I love this. So yeah, obviously with 3 screws, when you want to stop the lens hood from moving, it's very nice, it's very precise, everything is good. That said, there is something, a small little oversight, I would say, in the design, is the spacing between the dovetail bar at the bottom of the scope and the lens hood itself. Let me explain what I mean. Let me retract the lens hood fully. And what I find immediately is that if the dovetail is extended a little bit in this direction towards the hood, it's actually going to be flush against the hood. So the hood will not be able to go under the dovetail. If we had slightly more spacing or slightly thicker rings here, or even like some spacers, something to basically raise the dovetail a tiny bit, it would help us adjust the dovetail to actually go more towards the front. It's a very minor detail, but it's something that I noticed with this scope. Okay, so we see the hood is very smooth. It's going to be held in place by 3 screws. It's beautiful. The rings are also very smooth, very easy to place around. What about what arguably is the most important mechanical part of the telescope, the focuser? So the focuser came protected by this little cover here, which is always nice. So we have a dual speed kind of focuser. And so we have the focusing mechanism with the standard single speed and dual speed kind of mechanism. And let me tell you, I thought that the ASCAR V that I reviewed recently was smooth. This is even smoother. It is a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to be moving this focusing tube up and down. I love it. And of course you have an 11:1 reduction ratio on this. This is so smooth. I could be doing that all day long, guys. This is amazing. And if we look at it from the front, of course, we have those graduations so that if you know roughly where your focus point is, you can always like go back to it or very close to it very soon. And I just still can't get over how smooth this focuser is. Maybe I'll just stop recording and just play with the focuser for the rest of the time. And there is something else to note about around the focuser assembly, which is the rotation. So we have 1 rotation lock screw, and this allows us to rotate the entire focuser assembly. So okay, that's nice, but we've seen that in other telescopes. But then we have a second adjustment here that allows us to rotate just this part here. This is really cool because it means that you can place the focus knobs anywhere you like relative to your mount and to your dovetail saddle, while also being able to independently change the angle of the camera. And this is actually really cool. I haven't really played with high-end or high-end-ish refractors that much, but this is the first time that I see this. This might actually be super common. Please let me know down in the comments what you think. If while you're on your way, you can leave a like, subscribe to the channel, or if you want to support me to do more reviews like that, you can also join my Patreon or join the channel. It really helps the channel out, and I would even say that the channel is possible thanks to you guys. So thank you so much. Anyway, you can see that I am pretty impressed by the mechanics of the telescope, but there's still one more mechanism that I think looks really cool, and it is the locking knob that we have. Typically here, this is going to be to lock the focus. If you have a fully automated astrophotography setup, this will always be in an unlocked position because you'll have an electronic focuser that moves the draw tube of the telescope. But if you are manually doing this and using a Basinoff mask, which is what I will be doing for this video, then it's very important to be able to perform the focus and then lock it. And with many other designs, the locking the telescope, doing this action will slightly shift the focus, which kind of defeats the purpose. But with this particular, apparently patented mechanism, it's actually pulling on the tube from both sides. I'm not exactly sure what happens, but it is made to avoid focus shift and tilt while this is tightened, which is really nice, and I'll try to see if it's actually true when I test the telescope under the stars. Another thing that I really like mechanically speaking with this telescope is the way that it is going to hold the field flattener, or your 2-inch diagonal if you're going to use it for visual use, or even 1.25 inch. It doesn't use thumb screws or a standard like thumb screw based compression ring. It uses a rotation type of ring. And I can simply rotate it to be able to remove the 2-inch to 1.25 inch adapter. And in here, I'll place the focal reducer and then tighten everything up. There it is. Now everything is properly set, and this is such a nice tightening mechanism to hold things in place. I really like when attention to details is paid on these mechanical aspects that try to avoid tilt, avoid issues that we typically have with lower end refractors. So this really gets a big thumbs up from me in terms of how we have fixed the field flattener here, which looks to be a 2-inch field flattener. The founder of the Optics has also apparently recently released, or is about to release, a focal reducer that will be a 0.8 times focal reducer for this, which is going to put the focal ratio from f6 to f4.9. So for now, I will only be testing with this field flattener here. But it's true that with a focal reducer, it further increases the versatility of this telescope. And for someone who's hesitating between like a refractor that doesn't require any work besides just attaching the camera and maybe doing some tilt adjustments, to something like a Newtonian here with overall like almost similar specs, except that the aperture on this one is a bit slower, then with the focal reducer, those two things are very close to one another. It's actually a really cool way that you can choose to go super budget, but you kind of like have the pain of setting up the Newtonian, keeping it in collimation, etc. Or you can go far more expensive, like 4 or 5 times more expensive, and have something like this, which is trouble-free, which is, you know, the hallmark of refracting telescopes for astrophotography. Okay, and here's how the telescope looks like with everything mounted on it. So we have the dew shield lens hood completely extended. We have the field flattener set up here, and then I have a very standard way of achieving 55 millimeters of back focus using the ZW filter drawer with the ZW 16.5 millimeters adapter. And of course, let's have a look at the optics at the front, because I love looking at optics. Look at this, how magnificent is this? We can see the camera sensor at the end. And the optics here, triplet ED APO, fully multi-coated. Delicious. And here it is, mounted on my AM5 mount. And doesn't it look absolutely beautiful? Yeah, for looks alone, it looks really good. But then so do other scopes from Ascar, William Optics, etc., etc. But I love telescope. What can I say? Of course, we have minute, which looks much jankier in comparison, but hey, that's how things are. One thing I forgot to mention, so yes, I will be testing and focusing for the test with this Bahtinov mask that I 3D printed for the occasion. I'll put the links to both the telescope, my other telescopes, everything in the description if you are interested. And I'll also have a link to the Bahtinov mask design file that I just dropped if you are interested. I also want to mention that the ZWEAF cannot be mounted natively on this telescope, so it requires an additional kit. But that kit is also sold, although separately, and I'll also put the link in the description if you want to mount your EAF. I didn't immediately find an obvious method to mount my Astro Aces focuser, so this is something that I look into a bit more, but it looks a bit difficult at first glance. So next step is optical tests. I am hoping that the weather tonight will actually improve and we'll get a few hours of clear skies. This is right after a typhoon, and we are also entering rainy season. If I can get clear skies, you will see the optical results in this video. If not, you'll have to wait for another video. So if that happens, click subscribe. And I had some time to test the telescope under the stars, which is really nice. And I actually did it across 2 nights with my 2 APS-C size cameras with slightly different setups to see how my equipment might affect the results. I did try out to defocus the stars right at the center of the frame and in both directions, and they were pretty much exactly as per the optical test that came with the telescope, so that was good. And I also tested the focus lock knob that seemed to be really good. It didn't shift anything when I locked the focus, so that was really good as well. So on those sides, we are good. Now, how about the optical quality? First, we're going to look at this image here. This is a stack of 5 30-second frame on Arcturus, if I remember correctly. And we can zoom in, and we can see we have some weird wave patterns, but I think that's more due to the camera than it is to the telescope. And the stars at the center, as would be expected, are really good. And also, we barely see any chromatic aberration, maybe a slight little tiny bit, but it looks to be really well controlled here. So that's a good thing. Now, if we look at the bottom right of the image, we get really nice round stars here. So here things are perfectly fine. We might get the stars slightly very slightly fatter than at the center, so we might be having some kind of field curvature going on here, but that's perfectly fine. And if we stay at the bottom of the frame and we go towards the left hand side of the frame, we see some slight elongation if you're a pixel peeper, but yeah, it's pretty decent. Now, if we go to the top left here, we see more elongation here. So here things are a bit worse, especially here in the corner. You can see the stars are really starting to get cometish, but I'm really zoomed in. So this is again for pixel peepers. And things got worse at the top right of the frame. You can see if we are pixel peeping, the stars look both elongated and out of focus at the same time, which likely means actually tilt on my side. So things that I could improve. And what's very interesting is that I did tests where I used the compression ring or the click lock kind of mechanism to reseat the flattener, and I got slightly better results than on this image afterwards. So that was interesting. And that's why I decided to have a second night where I spent some time with tilt adjustments, which didn't seem to do much, but with a different camera, different kind of elements in between the camera and the field flattener, while respecting the focal distance. And this is the image that I got. It was pretty cloudy up, so I just took one 5-second exposures. By the way, no calibration whatsoever on any of the frames. This is also Arcturus. And if we zoom in, we see the same thing as before, except we don't see the waves on the star anymore. And if I go to the left-hand side of the frame at the center, the stars are really good. We might see a little bit of chromatic aberration there, but I'm really zoomed in a lot here. The stars in this corner, bottom left, and at the bottom of the frame, they look perfectly fine. And the stars at the top left are also perfectly fine. We're looking good, and they're also look quite in focus. So this is really nice. Things break down a little bit if I zoom in on the top right. So they're elongated, but not quite towards the center here. So there might be, again, some kind of tilt going on that I would need to fix. And bottom right, we see slightly cometish stars. Again, if we zoom out, it's not going to be a problem, but they're there. But we can see the pattern is, at least to me, it seems to be different than on the first night. So by changing the camera, even though it's still APS-C, same sensor, and by changing the elements between the flattener and the camera, I see different results, which tells me that if I spent time adjusting the tilt, etc., I may be able to get a really, really good picture. And I did try to adjust tilt and things, but when I don't have an autofocuser connected, so I cannot run the hocus pocus kind of frame analysis, I kind of abandoned because I feel like the optics are still quite good, although my feeling that if there's any issue, it's not going to be with the telescope, it's going to be with the field flattener. And I'm very curious as well about how the focal reducer itself will also perform with the telescope, but I don't have it on hand. Overall, it's like what I expect from refractor optics with just me putting my equipment on the flattener without thinking too much about tilt or anything like that, right? So it's like the lazy approach to things. If people want to be pixel peepers, since we see a big difference between like the first night and the second night on the same target, it means that tilt, etc., is having an impact. And so it is fixable. Especially since in both examples we saw corners with really good star shapes, even a whole side with really good star shapes, and the orientation of the elongation of the stars changed from night to night. So again, it looks quite fixable, but it is something that I personally am too lazy to work on. By the way, on his channel, Nico Carver also tested the Founder Optics telescope, but the 86mm aperture version, and he saw one of the corners had the same kind of issue. He also figured it was probably tilt, but this is like for information. Overall, I think that if you're not a pixel peeper, this is a perfectly fine result. If you are a pixel peeper, I feel like adjustments can be made to make those stars near to perfect, although I can't be completely sure of that. So your mileage may vary, but I hope that this was some interesting insights into the telescope. I tried, by the way, to use the telescope without the field flattener to see how well it would work there, but I couldn't bring the camera in focus and I was too lazy to adjust the distance. I would likely have needed a diagonal to bring it to focus and I was too lazy for that. That said, in a follow-up video I'll be testing the same telescope without the flattener for solar imaging. So if you don't want to miss that, you can go and click that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment about what you think about this telescope and whether, what should I do to try and make those star shapes even better, although honestly, like if you're not a pixel peeper, they look perfectly fine to me. And are you interested in getting this telescope, or would you be looking at other places for the same price? Because right now we're in the ZW Ascar range, and we're very, very far from Takahashi or Borg type of range in terms of price. If you want to support the channel, you can join my Patreon, link in the description, or join the channel as a member. It really helps me make this channel possible. So thank you so much to all of my Patreon and channel members. You make this whole channel possible. With that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget whenever you can to look up at the stars and image them, and I'll see you next time.